Welcome to this compilation of 4 short sci-fi stories about peculiar planets. I'll be narrating Rockabye Grady by David Mason, The Polite People of Pudibundia by R.A. Lafferty, Perfect Answer by L.J. Stecher, and Fog of the Forgotten by Basil Wells. If you find yourself enjoying these stories, please go ahead and hit the like button. And I'll just let you know there are hundreds of stories on this channel and many more on my Substack where you can watch or listen ad-free and in podcast form if you prefer. A link to that, plus some modern novels I've narrated, are down in the description, so if you're interested, go check them out. But for now, let's get to the stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Rockabye Grady by David Mason. Narrated by William Skye. When on Pru'ut, you must do as the natives do, and that includes dying as they do. On the charts, it's P1345AZ, and a thin blue line marked with cryptic letters indicates that a Malolines cargo ship stops 3 times in each local year. The guide will tell you a little more, that it's a small hot planet covered with fern forests and swamps and inhabited by one of the innumerable primate-human species of the universe. It was also inhabited, for a while, by one Terran, James Grady. The natives call it Pru'ut, which freely translated means the world. They refer to themselves as Kia, which means people. James Grady, being a realist, called it the mudhole and added a descriptive adjective or two, but he did not find it nearly as unpleasant a place as a few others in which he had been in the course of 40 years of wandering. Pru'ut has no inclination and only one season, which is rather like a rainy August on Earth. When Grady arrived, he stepped from the landing stage of the Malolines Berenice into 6 inches of gluey mud. The sun was seldom out long enough to harden the surface of Pru'ut. "It's not an easy place," the departing agent Janssen told Grady. "Rain and heat and getting along with the locals." "Anything the matter with them?" Grady asked. He was watching the tall, yellow-pale shapes of natives loading bales into the Berenice's cargo slings. "Nothing much," Janssen said. "Same as any primitives. All kinds of complicated rules and taboos, and naturally they'll get as mad as hell at you if you scratch a single rule. Most of the data on that is in the agent's notebooks. You add anything to the record that seems to be worth putting down, the way the rest of us have." "And if they get mad at you, they stop packing plants," the Berenice's mate put in, "which will make the Mallow Company mad at you too. This place is a regular bargain basement for drug materials. At least 8 different drug plants, all of them worth as much as uranium. More in some ways." The ex-agent picked up a handful of brown leaves from a table. "This, for instance. It's a distant relation of coca. The natives chew it for fun, but it's the source of a first-class anesthetic. And this. If your kidneys ever break down, the doctors use this stuff to keep you alive. Kerosene, it's called. Anyway, you'll find price lists and descriptive material in the files. You've worked for Mallow before, haven't you?" "Yes," Grady said. "I put in 3 years on Tango in Port City. Then I quit for a while. Had something else to do." "Oh, what?" Grady's face cracked into a slight grin. "Little bit of an argument. The mutiny. I joined the local army, if you could call it that. I had my own gun, so they made me a major on the spot." "The mutiny?" The Berenice's mate had heard of that brief and savage war in which a handful of settlers and local militia had beaten off the troops of a powerful state and had actually won. The mate hastily readjusted his opinion of Grady upward. A trader's agent was one thing, a man who had fought through the mutiny was something more than that. The mate opened his mouth to ask more of the story, but the Berenice's air horn cut him off with a long wail. "Take off in 20 minutes, the mate said as the noise subsided. "You ready, Janssen?" The ex-agent nodded and shook hands with Grady. "Good luck," he said, and started for the ship, the mate following. "Yeah," Grady said, closing the door of the agency. He had completely put the Berenice out of his mind by the time the roar of her departure split the wet air of Pruut. He was, in fact, well on his way to settling down as a permanent resident by that time. A year later, the Berenice had called twice, and her captain and mate were calling Grady by his first name. He had also acquired a native woman who, in accordance with one of the innumerable customs, could not call him by name at all. She referred to him as Kotasa, which is a sort of title. He, also in accordance with customs, called her Shalra, which was not her name, but that of her mother. Grady was also extremely careful not to speak to her mother at all because of another custom. Grady, Kotasa to his wife and Shassa to the rest of the village, fitted in well, better than any Terran had until his coming. Grady had spent most of his life living in odd places and with strange people, and had come to the conclusion that it was always a good idea to be a conservative by local standards. He could recall quite clearly the day he had found what was left of Steiner, who had tried to change the dietary habits of the inhabitants of Kree. By comparison with the Kree, the Kia were an easy people to get along with. Their lives were not hard, since Pruut was a fertile world and full of food sources. The Kia farmed their garden patches, fished and hunted, and spent the remaining time gathering plants for Grady and reciting endless and complex genealogies. Grady paid for the plants with goods from the trade warehouse and listened gravely to the genealogies, making mental notes whenever anything was mentioned that might be of practical use. He did not consider himself as a collector of scientific information. He was a practical man, and he selected information for practical ends. Shalra was the best wife he had ever had, and Grady had lived on several worlds. She spoke little, and when she did, it was direct and to the point. She was affectionate, but like most Kia, undemonstrative. She had been brought up to consider that males were equals, but that certain male privileges, such as the lodge magics and the use of hornpipes, were inviolable. Grady had lived on one world where men were considered very much superior to women, and had found that the attitudes which result are not as pleasant as they might seem. And lastly, Shalra was probably the best cook on Pruut, if not the best on several worlds. The Kia generally liked and trusted Grady, and after 2 years he was almost one of them. Standing on the agency porch in the weak sunlight, he seemed to have acquired the same yellowish skin and lean face, and he was dressed in the same loose kilt. Shalra came out to stand beside him, and they looked like any other Kia. "The sun," she said gravely. "There will be a dance tonight." Grady nodded. "Like to see it," he said. "The dance, I mean." "It is for men," Shalra said. "Kor," she pointed at the sun, "is a god belonging to men. The women dance when the sky clears in the night." "Men's dance, eh?" Grady said, sucking on his pipe. "You're probably right about it being all right for me to go, but I'd better check with the chief anyway." He started down the log-paved walk toward the chief's house on the other side of the village. He could see it clearly at the far end of the long, muddy street, but it was necessary to walk along a twisting detour rather than directly toward it. There was an acre of ground in the center of the village filled with crumbling, empty huts, and no Kia walked through this ground. It belonged to Sa'aha, whose ghost walked in a wide circle around the hut where a jealous rival had speared him in his sleep. The house was the usual Kia affair, on tall stilts, with painted signs on its facade, but much more elaborate as befitted the chief's position. He was Anla who speaks for the ancestors. There were several other kinds of chief, but it was Anla whom Grady consulted before trying anything in the least unusual. Anla sat on his porch now, regarding the sun through slitted eyes. Grady greeted him in proper form, and Anla returned the greeting, rising and bowing. "Is there any reason why this person may not attend the dance of Kor with his brothers on this night?" Grady asked. Anla thoughtfully pulled his lower lip, then, nodding, he said, "No, there is no reason not to." Then Grady made the mistake. He made it in full view of Anla's mother-in-law, who sat peering balefully out from her special room in the corner of the chief's house, and of Anla's wife, and of his wife's innumerable relations who were clustered on the porch. When Grady saw their silent staring, he looked down at his feet, and he saw what it was that he had done. Anla saw it too, and the two men looked up again, and at each other very gravely. Grady did not say he was sorry. It would have been of no use whatever. Nor did he point out that the sun came out so infrequently that his mistake was one which could be excused. Among the Kia there are very few mistakes which can be excused, and stepping on the shadow of a chief is not one of them. Neither did Anla make any reference to the long friendship between them, because there would have been no point in doing so. Anla's eyes grew darker, and the wrinkles at their corners deepened, but his words were calm, the correct words for such a time. "Your name was Shasa," Anla said. "You have broken the ghost cloak of the chief, and your name cannot be Shasa. From this place and this time I take back your name, Shasa, and you have no name." Grady did not say anything because a Kia cannot hear the words of a man without a name. Besides, there was nothing to say, though a great deal to think about. The Berenice was due in 4 days. 4 days during which a man without a name would have to avoid the custom which decreed that such a man must be killed. Killed as soon as possible, because each day he continued to live was a day which must be removed from the calendar, a day on which no man's birth date might be celebrated, or any animal killed for food, or any root taken from a garden. Grady turned and walked slowly with a stiff back down the path away from the chief's house. To run or to show fear would be fatal. The Kia were themselves in a state of shock at the thing which had happened, and it would be an hour or more before they began to prepare for what they had to do. Therefore Grady held his spine straight, feeling a cold spot between his shoulder blades where the first iron-headed arrow might strike in. Ahead of him, through the village, the silent children ran on light feet, darting into the houses and out again, the children who were the bearers of news. He saw 3 of them dash toward the agency and enter it, and in a moment, as he came up the path, Shalra came out on the porch carrying a clay pot in her hands. "You who were Kotasa," she said, "take this and drink it to free me of your name." It was the standard form of divorce among the Kia, and if the eyes of Shalra had not been bright with tears, Grady might have slipped. He took the clay pot, but he did not drink because he could smell the faint and bitter odour about it, which was not the odour of the fruit wine that it should have held. "Why?" he asked her quietly. "Because it is an easier death than the knife and the arrow," she said, and added, "When you were Kotasa, you were a good man for me. Drink the wine." She said it pleadingly. He shook his head. "I am sorry," Shalra said, and there is nothing harder for a Kia to say. But she added something even harder for a Kia woman to say, his name, his proper name, which she had always known but could never use. Then she walked away and out of Grady's life because he was now a man without a name. He set the pot down carefully on the agency's steps and went inside. As he closed the door there was a high whistling noise and a sharp thud against the door planks. He did not need to look to know that an arrow stood in its wooden panels. Grady closed the heavy wooden shutters carefully, not even jumping when a second arrow whickered through the last shutter as it swung. He lit a table lamp and took the heavy, seldom-used rifle from the wall. He did not need to check it. He had oiled and cleaned it once a week for 2 years. Instead, he laid it on the table and took a book down from a shelf. "General Code of the Federation Authority." Grady read the words on the spine and opened it. "Extent of responsibilities of individuals on mandated planets." Under the circumstances, Grady discovered, he could kill any number of Kia if he were so inclined. The authority would require a full report in quadruplicate of the circumstances, and as another arrow struck the door, Grady wondered wryly who would make out that report. Also, Grady was not in the least inclined to kill any Kia. If doing so would have saved his life, he would have shot any number of them without any particular qualms. But there were no reasons at all to think that killing any of them would do Grady any good. And Grady thoroughly understood why it was that they had to kill him. He was no more angry with the Kia than he had been with the Imperial Guards 5 years before when they had come up Cano Hill with their band playing and their bayonets gleaming. He could remember how military and colourful they had looked, in comparison to the overawed, grimy rabble who stood beside him, and how they had come up that hill again and again, fewer of them each time, and the band losing a bit of verve on the last. Grady's anger then had been at the damned fool, whoever he was, who ordered those useless charges, and his anger now was with himself because it had been his own mistake. There was a growing murmur outside the agency. The villagers were gathering in the street and in the yards behind the building. There was no way out now, and nowhere to go if there had been a way out. Grady got up and walked to the door. He opened the sliding panel a crack and peered out. The rain had begun again, and through its thin grey curtain he could see the ranks of villagers, silent, standing around the house, along the railings and watching. The men stood in front, each holding his weapons, his bow bent in his hands. There was Larsha, who had been brother in the lodge to Grady, and whose blood had been mixed with his to seal the tribal bond. There was Arl, whose small son Grady had nursed through a bad week. There were Grady's friends and neighbours and brothers, each with an arrow on the nock for Grady. "It's a queer thing to happen," Grady said to himself aloud. The sound of his own voice startled him. He had become so much a Kia that to him a man without a name should not have a voice. The arrows struck oftener now. Grady saw a small group of men move away and then return, carrying a short log. The door, Grady thought. They'll break it down and come in with their grave faces and their polite ways, and they'll cut my throat. And it won't matter if I kill 1 or 2 or 10 of them, they'll do it anyway. They won't hear an argument because they can't hear me at all without a name. They won't even hear any noise I make when they finish me off. The log had begun to beat against the door with a steady thunder. Grady opened a cabinet and took out a jar of brown liquid. Quickly, he drank it and sat down, his face greying. His head fell forward on his arms, and the book of regulations fell to the floor atop the unfired rifle. The Berenice swung outward, riding home to port with an empty hold. The Mallow Company would not be pleased, but there were other jobs. And the mate, sitting across the messroom table from James Grady, put the matter in its simplest terms. "Just one of those things," the mate said. "You can't be blamed. They'll take another agent without any fuss, I imagine." "No doubt of it," Grady said. "Can't say I'm glad to leave, though. It was a good place." "I still don't get it," the mate said. "We came in and found you in the agency out cold with coca. The door was down and arrows all over the place. Why didn't they come in and dig a knife into you?" "Customs and taboos," Grady said. "I took a chance on it, but I was pretty sure I was right. Common sense by their standards. Man's asleep, his ghost is walking around. If you kill him in his sleep, you free his ghost, which is very bad, very strong magic. So you have to wake him up to kill him. And they couldn't wake me up. I was full of that coca leaf. Enough for a week." The Polite People of Pudibundia by R.A. Lafferty. Narrated by William Skye. This was a world where minding your manners was more than just a full-time job. It was murder. "Well, you will soon see for yourself, Marlowe. Yes, I know there are peculiar stories about the place. There are about all places. The young pilots who have been there tell me some amusing tales about it." "Yes, they say the people there are very polite." "That is the honourable ancestor of all understatements. One of the pilots, Conrad, told us that the inhabitants must always carry 7 types of eyeglasses with them. None of the Puds, you see, may ever gaze directly on another. That would be the height of impoliteness. They wear amber goggles when they go about their world at large, and these they wear when they meet a stranger. But once they are introduced to him, then they must thereafter look on him through blue glasses. But at a blood relative they gaze through red, and at an in-law through yellow. There are equally interesting colours for other situations." "I would like to talk to Conrad. Not that I doubt his reports. It is the things he did not report that interest me." "I thought you knew he had died. Thrombosis, though he was sound enough when first certified. But if they are really people, then it should be possible to understand them." "But they are not really people. They are metamorphics. They become people only out of politeness." "Detail that a little." "Oh, they're biped and of a size of us. They have a chameleon-like skin that can take on any texture they please, and they possess extreme plasticity of features. You mean they can take on the appearance of people at will? So Bentley reported. I hadn't heard of him. According to Bentley, not only do the Puds take on a human appearance, they take on the appearance of the human they encounter. Out of politeness, of course. Quite a tribute, though it seems extreme. Could I talk to Bentley? Also dead. A promising young man. But he reported some of the most amusing aspects of all, the circumlocutions that the Puds use in speaking our language. Not only is the second person eschewed out of politeness, but in a way all the other persons also. One of them could not call you by your name, Marlowe. He would have to say, "One hears of one who hears of one of the noble name of Marlowe. One hears of one even now in his presence." Yes, that is quite a polite way of saying it, but it would seem that with all their circumlocutions they would be inefficient. Yet they are quite efficient. They do things so well that it is almost imperative that we learn from them. Yet for all our contacts, for all their extreme politeness coupled with their seeming openness, we have been able to learn almost nothing. We cannot learn the secret of the amazing productivity of their fields. According to Sharper, another of the young pilots, they suggest, though so circumspectly that it seems hardly a suggestion, certainly not a criticism, that if we were more polite to our own plants, the plants would be more productive for us, and if we gave the plants the ultimate of politeness, they would give us the ultimate of production. Could I talk to Sharper, or is he also— No, he is not dead. He was quite well till the last several days. Now, however, he is ailing, but I believe it will be possible for you to talk to him before you leave, if he does not worsen. It would still seem difficult for the Puds to get anything done. Wouldn't a superior be too polite to give a reprimand to an inferior? Probably. But masters who visited them had a theory about it, which is that the inferior would be so polite and deferential that he would do his best to anticipate a wish or a desire, or would go to any lengths to learn the import of an unvoiced preference. Is Masters one of the young pilots? No, an old-timer. Now you do interest me. Dead quite a few years. But it is you who interest me, Marlowe. I have been told to give you all the information you need about the polite people of Pudibundia, and on the subject of the polite people, I must also be polite. But saving your presence, and one hears of one who hears and all that, what in Gehenna is a captain in homicide on the solar police force going to Pudibundia about? About murder. That is all I ever go anywhere about. We once had a private motto that we would go to the end of the earth to solve a case. And now you have amended your motto to the end of the earth and beyond? We have. But what have the polite people to do with murder? Crime is unknown on Pudibundia. We believe, saving their feelings, that it may not be unknown there. And what I am going to find out is this. There have been pilots for many years who have brought back stories of the Puds, and there are still a very few, young pilots alive to tell those stories. What I am going to find out is why there are no old pilots around telling those stories. It wasn't much of a trip for a tripper, 6 weeks, and Marlowe was well received. His host also assumed the name of Marlowe out of politeness. It would have been impossible to render his own name in human speech, and it would have been impossible for him to conceive of using any name except that of his guest with its modifiers. Yet there was no confusion. Marlowe was Marlowe, and his host was the 1,000,000 times lesser Marlowe. "We could progress much faster," said Marlowe, "if we dispensed with these formalities." "Or assumed them as already spoken," said the 1,000,000 times lesser Marlowe. "For this, in private but only in the strictest privacy, we use the deferential ball. Within it are all the formulae written minutely. You have but to pass the ball from hand to hand every time you speak, and it is as if the amenities were spoken. I will give you this for the time of your stay. I beg you never to forget to pass it from hand to hand every time you speak. Should you forget, I would not, of course, be allowed to notice it. But when you are gone, I should be forced to kill myself for the shame of it. For private reasons I wish to avoid this, and therefore beseech you to be careful." The 1,000,000 times lesser Marlowe, hereafter to be called OMTLM for convenience but not out of any lack of politeness, gave Marlowe a deferential ball about the size of a ping-pong ball. And so they talked. "As a police official, I am particularly interested in the crime situation on Pud," said Marlowe. "An index of 0 is, well, if I could find a politer word I would use it, suspicious. And as you are, as well as I can determine, the head police official here, though in politeness your office would have another name, I am hoping that you can give me information." "Saving your grace and formula of a formula, what would you have me tell you about?" "Suppose that a burglar, for politeness' sake called something else, were apprehended by a policeman, likewise. What would happen?" "Why, the policeman, not so called, and yet we must be frank, would rattle his glottis in the prescribed manner." "Rattle his I see. He would clear his throat with the appropriate sound. And then the burglar, not so called?" "Would be covered with shame, it is true, but not fatally. For the peace of his own soul he would leave the site in as dignified a manner as possible." "With or without boodle?" "Naturally without. One apprehended in the act is obliged to abandon his loot. That is only common politeness." "I see. And if the burglar, not so called, remains unapprehended? How is the loss of goods or property recorded?" "It goes into the coefficient of general diminution of merchandise, which is to say, shrinkage, wastage, or loss. At certain times and places, this coefficient becomes alarmingly large. Then it is necessary to use extraordinary care, and in extreme cases, a thrice-removed burglar may become so ashamed of himself that he will die." "That he will die of shame? Is that a euphemism?" "Let us say that it is a euphemism of a euphemism." "Thrice removed, I imagine. And what of other crimes?" Here OMTLM rattled his glottis in a nervous manner, and Marlowe hurriedly transferred his deferential ball to the other hand, having nearly forgotten it. "There being no crime, we can hardly speak of other crimes," said OMTLM. "But perhaps in another matter of speaking you refer to—" "Crimes of violence," said Marlowe. "Saving your presence and formula of a formula, what would we have to be violent about? What possible cause?" "The usual. Greed, lust, jealousy, anger, revenge, plain perversity." "Here also it is possible for one to die of shame, sometimes the offender, sometimes the victim, sometimes both. A jealous person might permit both his wife and her paramour to die of shame, and the state in turn might permit him to perish likewise unless there were circumstances to modify the degree of shame. Then he might still continue to live, often in circumscribed circumstances, for a set number of years. Each case must be decided on its own merits." "I understand your meaning, but why build a fence around it?" "I do not know what you mean." "I believe that you do. Why are the polite people of Pudibundia so polite? Is it simply custom?" "It is more than that," said the polite Pud. "Then there is a real reason for it. And can you tell it to me?" "There is a real reason for it. I cannot tell it to you now, though, and perhaps not ever. But there is a chance that you may be given a demonstration of it just before you leave, and if you are very wise, you may be able then to guess the reason. I believe that there are several who have guessed it. I hope that we will have time for other discussions before you leave our sphere, and I sincerely do hope that your stay on Pudibundia is a pleasant one. And now, saving your presence, we must part. Formula of a formula." "Formula of a formula and all that," said Marlowe, and went to discover the pleasures of Pudibundia. Among the pleasures of Pud was Mitzi, miniature image 1,000 times removed of the zestful Irma, who had now shaped up into something very nice, and shaped up is the correct term. At first, Marlowe was shocked by the appearance of all the females he met on Pud. Crude-featured, almost horse-faced. How could they all look like that? And he was even more shocked when he finally realized the reason. He had become used to the men there looking like himself out of politeness, and this abomination was the female version of his own appearance. But he was a man of resources. He took from his pocket a small picture of Irma that he always carried, and showed it to the most friendly of the girls. "Could you possibly look like that? Why, of course. Let me study it for a moment. Now then. So the girl assumed the face of Irma. Incredible, said Marlowe, except Irma is red-headed. You have only to ask. The photo is not coloured, and so I did not know. We will try this shade to start with. Close, but could you turn it just a little darker? Of course. And there she was, Irma of the most interesting face and wonderful hair. But the picture had been of the face only. Below that the girl was a sack. If only there were some way to convey what was lacking. You are still not pleased with me, said the miniature image 1,000 times removed of the zestful Irma, Mitzi. But you have only to demonstrate. Show me with your hands. Marlowe, with his hands, sculpted in the air the figure of Irma as he remembered it, and Mitzi assumed the form, first face on, then face away, then in profile. And when they had it roughly, they perfected it, a little more here, a little less there. But there were points where his memory failed him. If you could only give me an idea of the convolutions of her ears, said Mitzi, and the underlying structure of the metatarsus. My only desire is to please. Or shall I improvise where you do not remember? Yes, do that, Mitzi. And how that girl could improvise. Marlowe and Mitzi were now buddies. They made a large evening of it. They tied one on, formula of a formula, but they tied one on. They went on a thrice-removed bender. At the Beetlejuice Bar and Grill they partook of the cousin of the alcohol itself in the form of the nono-rhombozoid made of 9 kinds of rum. At the B-flat Starlight Club they listened to the newest and most exciting music on all Pudibundia. At Alligator John's one checks his inhibitions at the door. Here one also checks his deferential ball. Of course, the formulae are built into the walls, and at each exchange it is always assumed that they are said. But the iris room is really the ultimate. The light comes through 7 different colours of glass, and it is very dim when it arrives. And there the more daring remove their goggles entirely and go about without them in the multicoloured twilight. This is illegal. It is even foolhardy. There is no earthly equivalent to it. To divest oneself and disport with nudists would be tame in comparison. But Mitzi and her friends were of the reckless generation, and the iris room was their rendezvous. The orgy will not be detailed here. The floor show was wild. Yet we cannot credit the rumour that the comedian was so crude as to look directly at the audience even in that coloured twilight, or they so gauche as to laugh outright at the jokes, they who had been taught always to murmur, "One knows of one who knows of one who ventures to smile." Yet there was no doubting that the iris room was a lively place, and when they left it at dawn, Marlowe was pleased and sleepy and tipsy. There was a week of pleasure on Pudibundia, swimming with Mitzi down at West Beach, gourmandizing with Mitzi at Gastrophiles, dancing with Mitzi, pub crawling, romancing, carrying on generally. The money exchange was favourable, and Marlowe was on an expense account. It was a delightful time. But still he did not forget the job he was on, and in the midst of his pleasure he sought always for information. "When I return here," he said slyly, "we will do the many things that time does not allow. When I come back here—" "But you will not return," said Mitzi. "Nobody ever does." "And why not? It is surely a pleasant place to return to. Why won't I return?" "If you cannot guess, then I cannot tell you. Do you have to know why?" "Yes, I have to know why. That is why I came here, to find out. To find out why the young men who come here will never be able to return here, or to anywhere else." "I can't tell you." "Then give me a clue." "In the iris room was a clue. It was not till the colour-filtered light intruded between us that we might safely take off our goggles. I would save you if I could. I want you to come back. But those higher in authority make the decisions. When you leave, you will not return here or anywhere else." "But already one has spoken to one who has spoken to one who has spoken too much." "There is a point beyond which politeness is no longer a virtue, Mitzi." "I know. If I could change it, I would." So the period of the visit was at an end, and Marlowe was at his last conference with OMTLM, following which he would leave Pudibundia, perhaps forever. Is there anything at all else you would like to know? Asked OMTLM. There is almost everything that I still want to know. I have found out nothing. Then ask. I don't know how. If I knew the questions to ask, it is possible that I would already know the answers. Yes, that is entirely possible. OMTLM seemed to look at him with amused eyes, and yet the eyes were hidden behind purple goggles. Marlowe had never seen the eyes of OMTLM. He had never seen the eyes of any of the Puds. Even in the iris room in that strangely coloured light it had not been possible to see their eyes. Are you compelling me to do something? Asked Marlowe. I may be compelling you to think of the question that has eluded you. Would you swear that I have not been given some fatal sickness? I can swear that to the very best of my knowledge you have not. Are you laughing at me with your eyes? No. My eyes have compassion for you. I have to see them. You are asking that? Yes. I believe the answer to my question is there, Marlowe said firmly. OMTLM took off his purple goggles. His were clear, intelligent eyes, and there was genuine compassion in them. Thank you, said Marlowe. If the answer is there, it still eludes me. I have failed in my mission for information. But I will return again. I will still find out what it is that is wrong here. No, you will not return. What will prevent me? Asked Marlowe. Your death in a very few weeks. What will I die of? What did all your young pilots die of? But you swore that you did not know of any sickness I could have caught here, Marlowe cried. That was true when I said it. It was not true a moment later. Did all the pilots ask to see your eyes? Yes, all. Curiosity is a failing of you earthlings. Is it that the direct gaze of the Puds kills? Yes, even ourselves it would kill. That is why we have our eyes always shielded. That is also why we erect another shield, that of our ritual politeness, so that we may never forget that too intimate an encounter of our persons may be fatal. Then you have just murdered me. Let us say rather that one hears of one who killed unwillingly. Why did you do it to me? Demanded Marlowe. You asked to see my eyes. It would not be polite to refuse. It takes you several weeks to kill. I can do it in a few seconds. You would be wrong to try. Our second glance kills instantly. Let's see if it's faster than a gun. But OMTLM had not lied. It is not polite to lie on Pudibundia. Marlowe died instantly. And that is why, though you may sometimes hear a young pilot tell amusing stories immediately, very immediately, on his return from Pudibundia, you will never find an old pilot who has ever been there. If you're enjoying the stories, hit the like button. It helps the channel grow. Thanks. Perfect Answer by L.J. Stecher Jr. Narrated by William Skye. Getting there may be half the fun, but it is also all of a society's chance of survival. As one god to another, let's go home, Jack Bates said. Bill Farnham raised a space-gloved hand in negligent acknowledgement to a hastily kneeling native and shook his head at Bates. Let's try Deneb. It's almost in line on the way back, and then we can call it quits. But I want to get back and start making some profit out of this. The galaxy is full of Homo sapiens. We've hit the jackpot first trip out. Let's hurry on home and cash in. We need more information. This is too much of a good thing. It doesn't make sense. I know there isn't much chance of finding anything out by stopping at one more solar system, but it won't delay us more than a few weeks, and it won't hurt to try. Yeah, said Bates, but what's in it for us? And what if we find an inhabited planet? You know the chances are about 2 to 1 that we will. That'll make 13 we've found on this trip. Why risk bad luck? You're no more superstitious than I am, said Farnham. You just want to get back Earthside. I'll tell you what, we'll toss a coin for it. Bates gestured futilely toward his coverall pocket, and then remembered he was wearing a spacesuit as a precaution against possible contamination from the natives. And we'll use one of my coins this time, said Farnham, noticing the automatic motion. I want to have a chance. The coin dropped in Farnham's favour, and their two-man scout ship hurled itself into space. Farnham operated the compact computer, aligning the ship's velocity vector precisely while the stars could still be seen. Bates controlled the engines, metering their ravenous demand for power just this side of destructive detonation, while the ship sucked energy from space, from the adjacent universe on the other side of limbo. Finally, the computer chimed, relays snicked, and the ship slid into the emptiness of limbo as the stars winked out. With two trained men working as a team with the computer and the elaborate engine room controls, and with a certain amount of luck, the ship would drop back into normal space a couple of weeks later, close beside their target. Well, that's that, said Farnham, relaxing and wiping the perspiration off his forehead. We're back once again in the nothingness of nowhere. As I recall, it's your week for KP. Where's the coffee? Coming right up, said Bates, but you won't like it. It's the last of the god food the Korite priests made for us. Farnham shuddered. Pour it out and make some fresh. With a skillet, you stink, but you're 1,000 times better than Korites. Thanks, Bates said, getting busy. It was the third place we stopped that they were such good cooks, wasn't it? No, our third stop was the Porandians. They tried to kill us, called us devil spawn from the stars. You're thinking of the fourth stop, the Balanites. Bates shrugged. It's kind of hard to keep them all straight. Either they fall on their knees and worship us, or they try to kill us without even asking questions. Maybe it's lucky they're all so primitive. It may be lucky, but it doesn't add up. More than half the stars we visit have planets that can support human life, and every one that can does. Once there must have been an interstellar empire, so why are all their civilizations so backward? They aren't primitive, they're decadent. And why do they all have such strong feelings, one way or the exact opposite, about people from the stars? Isn't that why you want to try one more system? Asked Bates. To give us another chance to get some answers. Here's your coffee. Try to drink it quietly. I'm going to get some shut-eye. The trip through the limbo between adjacent universes passed uneventfully, as always. The computer chimed again on schedule, and a quick check by Farnham showed the blazing sun that suddenly appeared was Deneb, as advertised. 17 planets could be counted, and the 5th seemed to be Earth-type. They approached it with the easy skill of long practice and swung into orbit about it. This is what we've been looking for, exclaimed Farnham, examining the planet through a telescope. They've got big cities and dams and bridges. They're civilized. Let's put the ship down. Wait up, said Bates. What if they've got Starman phobia? Remember, they're people just like us, and with people, civilization and weapons go together. I think you've got it backwards. If they hate us, we can probably get away before they bring up their big artillery. But what if they love us? They might want to keep us beside them forever. Bates nodded. I'm glad you agree with me. Let's get out of here. Nobody but us knows of the beautiful, profitable planets we've found, all ready to become part of a Terran empire. And if we don't get back safe and sound, nobody will know. The information we've got is worth a fortune to us, and I want to be alive to collect it. Sure, but we've got the job of trying to find out why all those planets reverted to barbarism. This one hasn't. Maybe the answer's here. There's no use setting up an empire if it won't last. It'll last long enough to keep you and me on top of the heap. That's not good enough. I want my kids, when I have them, to have their chances at the top of the heap too. Oh, all right. We'll flip a coin then. We already did. You may be a sharp dealer, but you'd never welch on a bet. We're going down. Bates shrugged. You win. Let's put her down beside that big city over there, the biggest one by the seashore. As they approached the city, they noticed at its outskirts a large flat plain dotted with gantries. Like a spaceport, suggested Bill. That's our target. They landed neatly on the tarmac and then sat there quietly, waiting to see what would happen. A crowd began to form. The two men sat tensely at their controls, but the throng clustering about the base of the ship showed no hostility. They also showed no reverence, but rather a carefree interest and joyful welcome. Well, said Farnham at last, looks like we might as well go outside and ask them to take us to their leader. I'm with you as usual, said Bates, starting to climb into his spacesuit. Weapons? I don't think so. We can't stop them if they get mad at us, and they look friendly enough. We'll start off with the let's be pals routine. Bates nodded. After we learn the language. I always hate this part, it moves so slowly. You'd think there'd be some similarity among the tongues on different planets, wouldn't you? But each one's entirely different. I guess they've all been isolated too long. The two men stepped out on the smooth plain to be instantly surrounded by a laughing, chattering crowd. Farnham stared around in bewilderment at the variety of dress the crowd displayed. There were men and women in togas, in tunics, in draped dresses and kilts, in trousers and coats. Others considered a light cloak thrown over the shoulders to be adequate. There was no uniformity of style or custom. You pick me a boss man out of this bunch, he muttered to Bates. Finally, a couple of young men, glowing with health and energy, came bustling through the crowd with an oblong box which they set down in front of the Earthmen. They pointed to the box and then back at Farnham and Bates, laughing and talking as they did so. What do you suppose they want us to do? Farnham asked. One of the young men clapped his hands happily and reached down to touch the box. What do you suppose they want us to do? Asked the box distinctly. Oh, a recording machine. Probably to help with language lessons. Might as well help them out. Farnham and Bates took turns talking at the box for half an hour. Then the young man nodded, laughed, clapped his hands again, and the two men carried it away. The crowd went with them, waving merrily as they departed. Bates shrugged his shoulders and went back into the ship, with Farnham close behind. A few hours after sunrise the following morning, the crowd returned as gay and carefree as before, led by the two young men who had carried the box. Each of these two now had a small case about the size of a camera slung by a strap across one brawny shoulder. As the terrestrials climbed out to meet them, the two men raised their hands and the crowd discontinued its chatter, falling silent except for an occasional tinkle of surprised laughter. Welcome, said the first young man clearly. It is a great pleasure for us to have our spaceport in use again. It has been many generations since any ships have landed on it. Farnham noticed that the voice came from the box. Thank you for your very kind welcome, he said. I hope that your traffic will soon increase. May we congratulate you, by the way, on the efficiency of your translators? Thanks, laughed the young man. But there was nothing to it. We just asked the Oracle and he told us what we had to do to make them. May we meet your Oracle? Oh, sure, if you want to. But later on. Now it's time for a party. Why don't you take off those clumsy suits and come along? We don't dare remove our spacesuits. They protect us from any disease germs you may have, and you from any we may have. We probably have no resistance to each other's ailments. The Oracle says we have nothing that will hurt you, and we're going to spray you with this as soon as you get out of your suits. Then you won't hurt any of us. He held up a small atomizer. Farnham glanced at Bates, who shrugged and nodded. They uneasily unfastened their spacesuits and stepped out of them, wearing only their light one-piece coveralls, and got sprayed with a pleasant-smelling mist. The party was a great success. The food was varied and delicious. The liquors were sparkling and stimulating without unpleasant after-effects. The women were uninhibited. When a native got tired, he just dropped down onto the soft grass or onto an even softer couch and went to sleep. The Earthmen finally did the same. They awoke the following morning within minutes of each other, feeling comfortable and relaxed. Bates shook his head experimentally. "No hangover," he muttered in surprise. "No one ever feels bad after a party," said one of their guides who had slept nearby. "The oracle told us what to do when we asked him." "Quite a fellow, your oracle," commented Bates. "Does he answer you in riddles like most oracles?" The guide was shocked. "The oracle answers any questions promptly and completely. He never talks in riddles." "Can we go to see him now?" asked Farnham. "Certainly. Come along. I'll take you to the hall of the oracle." The oracle appeared to live in a building of modest size in the centre of a tremendous courtyard. The structure that surrounded the courtyard, in contrast, was enormous and elaborate, dominating the wildly architectured city. It was, however, empty. "Scholars used to live in this building, they tell me," said one of their guides, gesturing casually. "They used to come here to learn from the oracle. But there's no sense in learning a lot of stuff when the oracle has always got all the answers anyway. So now the building is empty. The big palace was built back in the days when we used to travel among the stars, as you do now." "How long ago was that?" asked Farnham. "Oh, I don't know. A few thousand years, a few 100 years. The oracle can tell you if you really want to know." Bates raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know you'll always be given the straight dope?" The guide looked indignant. "The oracle always tells the truth." "Yes," Bates persisted, "but how do you know?" "The oracle told us so, of course. Now why don't you go in and find out for yourselves? We'll wait out here. We don't have anything to ask him." Bates and Farnham went into the building and found themselves in a small, pleasant room furnished with comfortable chairs and sofas. "Good morning," said a well-modulated voice. "I have been expecting you." "You are the oracle?" asked Farnham, looking around curiously. "The name that the people of this planet have given me translates most accurately as oracle," said the voice. "But are you actually an oracle?" "My principal function, insofar as human beings, that is, Homo sapiens, are concerned, is to give accurate answers to all questions propounded me. Therefore, insofar as humans are concerned, I am actually an oracle." "Then you have another function." "My principal function, insofar as the race that made me is concerned, is to act as a weapon." "Oh," said Bates. "Then you are a machine." "I am a machine," agreed the voice. "The people who brought us here said that you always tell them the truth. I suppose that applies when you are acting as an oracle instead of as a weapon." "On the contrary," said the voice blandly. "I function as a weapon by telling the truth." "That doesn't make sense," protested Bates. The machine paused for a moment before replying. "This will take a little time, gentlemen," it said, "but I am sure that I can convince you. Why don't you sit down and be comfortable? If you want refreshments, just ask for them." "Might as well," said Bates, sitting down in an easy chair. "How about giving us some core-eyed god food?" "If you really want that bad a brew of coffee, I can make it for you, of course," said the voice, "but I am sure you would prefer some of better quality." Farnham laughed. "Yes, please. Some good coffee, if you don't mind." "Now," said the oracle after excellent coffee had been produced, "it is necessary for me to go back into history a few 100,000 of your years. At that time, the people who made me entered this galaxy on one of their periodic visits of routine exploration and contacted your ancestors. The race that constructed me populates now, as it did then, the Greater Magellanic Cloud. Frankly, the Magellanic race was appalled at what they found. In the time since their preceding visit, your race had risen from the slime of your mother planet and was on its way towards stars. The speed of your development was unprecedented in millions of years of history. By their standards, your race was incredibly energetic, incredibly fecund, incredibly intelligent, unbelievably warlike, and almost completely depraved. Extrapolation revealed that within another 50,000 of your years, you would complete the population of this galaxy and would be totally unstoppable. Something had to be done fast. There were two obvious solutions, but both were unacceptable to my makers. The first was to assume direct control over your race and to maintain that rule indefinitely until such time as you changed your natures sufficiently to become civilizable. The expenditure of energy would be enormous, and the results probably catastrophic to your race. No truly civilized people could long contemplate such a solution. The second obvious answer was to attempt to extirpate you from this universe as if you were a disease, as in a sense you are. Because your depravity was not total or necessarily permanent, this solution was also abhorrent to my makers and was rejected. What was needed was a weapon that would keep operating without direct control by my people, which would not result in any greater destruction or harm to humans than was absolutely necessary, and one which would cease entirely to operate against you if you changed sufficiently to become civilizable, to become good neighbors to my makers. The final solution of the Magellanic race was to construct several thousand spaceships, each containing an elaborate computer, constructed so as to give accurate answers throughout your galaxy. I am one of those ships. We have performed our function in a satisfactory manner and will continue to do so as long as we are needed. "And that makes you a weapon?" asked Bates incredulously. "I don't get it." Farnham felt a shiver go through him. "I see it. The concept is completely diabolical." "It's not diabolical at all," answered the Oracle. "When you become capable of civilization, we can do you no further harm at all. We will cease to be a weapon at that time." "You mean you'll stop telling the truth at that time?" asked Bates. "We will continue to function in accordance with our design," answered the voice, "but it will no longer do you harm. Incidentally, your phrase, 'telling the truth,' is almost meaningless. We answer all questions in the manner most completely understandable to you, within the framework of your language and your understanding, and of the understanding and knowledge of our makers. In the objective sense, what we answer is not necessarily the truth, it is merely the truest form of the answer that we can state in a manner that you can understand." "And you'll answer any question at all?" asked Bates in some excitement. "With one or two exceptions. We will not, for example, tell you how we may be destroyed." Bates stood up and began pacing the floor. "Then whoever possesses you can be the most powerful man in the universe." "No, only in this galaxy." "That's good enough for me." "Jack," said Farnham urgently, "let's get out of here. I want to talk to you." In a minute, said Bates impatiently. "I've got one more question." He turned to face the wall from which the disembodied voice appeared to emanate. "Is it possible to arrange it so that you would answer only one man's questions, mine, for example?" "I can tell you how to arrange it so that I will respond to only your questions, for so long as you are alive." "Come on," pleaded Farnham. "I've got to talk to you right now." "Okay," said Bates, smiling. "Let's go." When they were back in their ship, Farnham turned desperately to Bates. "Can't you see what a deadly danger that machine is to us all? We've got to warn Earth as fast as we can and get them to quarantine this planet and any other planets we find that have oracles." "Oh, no, you don't," said Bates. "You aren't getting the chance to have the oracle all to yourself. With that machine we can rule the whole galaxy. We'll be the most powerful people who ever lived. It's sure lucky for us that you won the toss of the coin and we stopped here." "But don't you see that the oracle will destroy Earth?" "Bourgeois! You heard it say it can only destroy people who aren't civilized. It said that it's a spaceship, so I'll bet we can get it to come back to Earth with us and tell us how we can be the only ones who can use it." "We've got to leave here right away, without asking it any more questions." Bates shook his head. "Quit clowning." "I never meant anything more in my life. Once we start using that machine, if we ask it even one question to gain advantage for ourselves, Earth civilization is doomed. Can't you see that's what happened to those other planets we visited? Can't you see what is happening to this planet we're on now?" "No, I can't," answered Bates stubbornly. "The Oracle said there are only a few thousand like him." You could travel through space for hundreds of years and never be lucky enough to find one. There can't be an oracle on every planet we visited." "There wouldn't have to be," said Farnham. "There must be hundreds of possible patterns, all of them destructive in the presence of greed and laziness and lust for power. For example, a planet, maybe this one, gets space travel. It sets up colonies on several worlds. It's expanding and dynamic. Then it finds an oracle and takes it back to its own world. With all questions answered for, the civilization stops being dynamic and starts to stagnate. It stops visiting its colonies and they drift towards barbarism. Later," Farnham went on urgently, "someone else reaches the stars, finds the planet with the oracle, and takes the thing back home. Can you imagine what will happen to these people on this world if they lose their oracle? Their own learning and traditions and way of life have been destroyed. Just take a look at their anarchic clothing and architecture. The oracle is the only thing that keeps them going, downhill, and makes sure they don't start back again." "It won't happen that way to us," Bates argued. "We won't let the oracle get into general use, so Earth won't ever learn to depend on it. I'm going to find out from it how to make it work for the two of us alone. You can come along and share the gravy or not, as you choose. I don't care, but you aren't going to stop me." Bates turned and strode out of the ship. Farnham pounded his fist into his palm in despair and then ran to a locker. Taking out a high-power express rifle, he loaded it carefully and stepped out through the airlock. Bates showed clearly in his telescopic sight, still walking toward the hall of the oracle. Farnham fired at the legs, but he wasn't that good a shot. The bullet went through the back. Farnham jittered between bringing Bates back and taking off as fast as the ship could go. The body still lay there, motionless. There was nothing he could do for the oracle's first Earth victim. The first and the last, he swore grimly. He had to speed home and make them understand the danger before they found another planet with an oracle, so that they could keep clear of its deadly temptations. The Magellanic race could be outwitted yet, in spite of their lethal cleverness. Then he felt a sudden icy chill along his spine. Alone he could never operate the spaceship, and Bates was dead. He was trapped on the planet. For hours he tried to think of some way of warning Earth. It was imperative that he get back. There had to be a way. He realized finally that there was only one solution to his problem. He sighed shudderingly and walked slowly from the spaceship toward the hall of the oracle past Bates's body. "One question, though," he muttered to himself. "Only one." Remember to hit the like button to support the channel. Thanks. Fog of the Forgotten by Basil Wells. Narrated by William Skye. The fog of their world matched the fog in their minds. Rebelling against science, they smashed it, dragged their people down into the ancient mists. But Ho Diak wanted light. The fog sea thinned before Ho Diak, and he could see the dank rocks of the cliffs he scaled a scant 20 feet beneath his feet. The network of blue-veined pale vines that he climbed thinned even as the air itself thinned. Far below him, in the lowlands, the mat of agan vines was 300 feet in depth in many places. Higher and higher climbed Ho Diak, his long, pale face with its full red lips and great thick-lidded purple eyes drawn with pain. For the air of the uplands was chill. As the fog thinned, so too dropped the temperature. Ho Diak gripped tighter the pouch of flayed drog skin in which 5 of the forbidden foot-long cylinders of metal skins nestled as he paused for a moment to rest. It was because of them, the forbidden scroll stored in a musty forgotten chamber of the upper shrine of Lalal, the one god of Arbor, that Ho Diak was now climbing into the frigid death of the cloudless uplands. The ivory-skinned body of the man was swathed in layer upon layer of quilted and padded garments of leather and fabric. His 2 feet, with their webbed outstretched toes, and his short stubby middle limbs, strong-fingered webbed hands at their ends, were encased in sturdy mitten-like moccasins. Only his long upper hands were encased in stout leather gloves with 4 divisions, one for the thumb and the other 3 for his 4-jointed fingers. Over his grotesquely swollen bulk, for which his myriad garments were responsible, Hodiak's sword belt and the filled sheath of javelin-like darts were belted. To his crossed belts also were attached his broad-bladed machete-like knife and the throwing stick for his dwarfish spears. No longer did he fear pursuit. The fighting priests, the dark-robed Orsts of Lalal, had brought with them none of the warm garments Hodiak wore. Their shouts and sacred battle cries had died away on the slopes a mile or more beneath where he now perched. For the moment he was safe from their vengeance. "I will see what lies above the fog sea," said Hodiak to the unresponsive ladder-like network of Agan he climbed. "Perhaps I can, for a few short hours, see the vast plateaus that once my people ruled." The Agan made no answer, as Hodiak had expected it would not, but he bent his gaze more closely upon its smooth stems. A greenish tinge lay upon them, a tinge that in the lowlands only the rocks or tarnished metals bore. The man's heart beat faster despite the chilling cold. He was approaching an unknown zone of life. The fog sea split apart abruptly. His broad shoulders and then his thickly padded middle came above the last remnants of the mist. And he sensed a warmth that came from above, not a pleasant warmth, but a strangely stinging heat. He turned his hooded eyes skyward, and pain filled his brain at the glaring redness of the lights that blazed there. 3 suns, one huge primary and its offspring, that hung in the cloud-banked blue heavens overhead. Darkness dwindled into greyness, and he could see. He was looking out across a level, rolling expanse of fleecy nothingness. A soft sea of foggy mystery from which vagrant hills of vapour drifted upward lightly and settled back again. Down beneath that impenetrable damp blanket, he knew, lay the pleasant stone buildings and palaces of his people, and further away out there rolled the glooming, steaming sea of Thol, where men fished and hunted for the mighty aquatic monsters of the deeps. It was as though his homeland had never been, and he was a castaway here on this sun-drenched, vine-covered slope, with the blood chilling in his muscular, squat body. He shivered. He looked upward, and his heart hammered new warmth into his muscles as he saw that the rim of the mighty wall he ascended was but a score of feet above. He swung himself upward swiftly. Then he was standing upon a level expanse of grassy land beside a slow-flowing brook. The stream was clogged with aquatic, lush vegetation, and further up along it he saw moving shapes, lizard-like creatures and 4-legged graceful animals that were covered with a dusty golden fur. Beyond was a jungle of vine-linked growth, and far beyond that, a vast escarpment climbed, step upon step, upward to the white helmeted peaks of a mountain range. It was at this moment that Hodiak became aware of the ragged roaring sound from overhead. He squinted his eyes and was careful not to look into the terrible flare of light that was the sun's. The sound increased. After a moment he saw a dark speck low down to the western horizon, a speck that grew into a long stub-winged shape with vapour flaring like smoke from its rear. At first Hodiak thought that some living monstrous thing was diving upon him, and then he saw the fixed rigidity of the boat-like elongated craft. This was a man-made thing, a ship that rode noisily through the air even as the great canoes of the fisherfolk sailed upon the hot waves of mighty Thol. It was thus that the ancestors of his race had ridden in the long dead ages before the fog seas shrank downward from the mountains and plateaus. This was one of the machines that his embittered race had destroyed after cataclysmic disaster swept their world. He had thought that only in these precious stolen scrolls was there any record of that mighty civilization, yet here before his eyes a mighty thing of metal dropped swiftly. Then the winged thing seemed to explode and crumple as it nosed into the green expanse of tangled grasses near him. Flames licked out from the rear of the craft. 3 days had passed there upon the plateau shelf above the fog sea, and Hodiak had not returned to the welcome warmth of the lowlands of Arba. Instead, he had found a great spring of boiling water in the rocky valley not far from the crashed ship of the sky, and about this he had built a sturdy dome of clay-plastered stones. Within this comfortably damp and well-heated den, Hodiak sprawled and talked through the slitted doorway that was closed with triple hides of giant upland lizards. "I do not understand," said the lanky, sandy-haired man who sat sweating outside the steaming, mud-daubed mound, "why your people, with their marvellous control of telepathy and their one-time control over all this world, are content to live in savagery along the narrow strip of beach they now possess." Hodiak did not move his lips as he answered. Unlike the Earthman from the low, he did not need to speak aloud to transmit his thoughts. His hasty schooling of the 2 men and the girl he had rescued from the battered low had been designed to afford immediate communication. Later he would impress upon their brains the process of speechless transmission. Inventions, mechanical knowledge brought about the downfall of Arba, Glade Nelson. Lest any further destructive device do away with our last zone of livable atmosphere, all mechanical knowledge and experimentation is forbidden. The Earthman snorted. "I know that, Hodiak," he said, using his own word for the squat, ivory-skinned man. "But with pressure cities, transparent domes, and heated suits like the spacesuit we gave you, there's no reason why your ancient land should remain abandoned." "I agree with you, Earthman. Some of the wisest men of Arba have felt the same, but the priests of Lalal have branded them with blindness and driven them out into the Agan jungles. They are content with the barbaric simplicity of the lowlands." "Perhaps," said Glade Nelson, "now that you have escaped with your life and your vision, you can help your people in spite of themselves." Hodiak shook his big, square head. The broad, curly tendrils that sprouted yellowly from his skull half-covered the delicate, sharp tips of his up-thrust thin ears. "The power of Lalal over the common people is no light thing." The thoughts of the Earthman were confused for a moment, and then Hodiak heard, through the ears of Nelson, the frantic screams of the Earth Woman, the dark-haired sister of Nelson's employer, hairy, stocky Albert Gosden. Nelson snatched his high-powered rifle and raced away toward the sound. Hodiak sprang to his feet as well and slipped swiftly into the spacesuit that Nelson had provided him. He set the heat controls for a comfortable 200 degrees and pushed aside the hide curtains. He went racing after the Earthman. Although unhampered by the cumbersome spacesuit Hodiak wore and fleet of foot, Nelson saw the ivory man go racing by him, and he marveled at the strength and vitality of the squat Arban. Then they were at the stream beside a swampy lake dotted here and there with tree islets and banks of reeds, searching for the girl. They saw her flailing away at a swarm of scaly black lizard things, young 7 and 8 foot long drogs with a leafy branch. She was safe enough from them as she sat in the crotch of a moss-hung jungle giant at the lake's green-scummed rim, but Hodiak saw the ripples that were converging on the girl from other portions of the pool, and he reached down to the weapons belted now about his dull-sheen spacesuit. "Albert's dead," Marta Gosden sobbed, thwacking away. There was a bloody, broken thing, or rather things, that some of the young drogs quarrelled over in the thick, muddy shallows. Hodiak was busy now with his copper-tipped javelins. He was killing as swiftly as his throwing stick could contact the sturdy butts of the javelins. "Kill them," he flashed at Nelson, "for the grown monsters come." But the lanky man with only 2 arms did not heed his order. In the excitement of the moment, Nelson had reverted to the use of his ears. His mental receptive powers were as yet too untrained. Hodiak fought alone while Glade Nelson shouted to the girl to climb down a drooping limb toward him. Hodiak drove the crawling lizard beasts back until he stood beneath a tree. He held up his 2 upper arms, and the girl dropped her leafy, useless club before she slid down the loose, rough bark of the trunk. Then Hodiak turned and raced with her in his arms away from the lake. Nelson roared with sudden fear. Almost upon Hodiak's heels, a huge mouth gaped suddenly from the murky water, and then a scaly, six-legged monster came charging up over the low, marshy bank. Behind the first drog came another, and then another. All of them were over 20 feet in length, and their pace was not slow. They were overhauling the burdened ivory man. Hodiak put the girl down. He gave her a push in the direction of the wrecked ship, and with the same motion turned to face the drog's gaping maw. His stout double-edged sword was in his hand. He could feel its welcome pressure through the insulated layers of siladur that sealed out the chill air of the plateau. His sword flicked up toward the eye of the huge dragon. He pressed the button that released the needle-like extension from the weapon's tip, and his prolonged weapon ripped through the huge reddish eyeball. The monster roared with rage and, whistling with its blasting breath, swung its head. Again the sword flashed, and the blinded monster dashed itself against a huge, smooth-boled tree. Its legs crumpled for a moment, and then it was up, ripping ferociously with great nails and rending jaws at the unresisting wood. By now, Nelson had taken a hand. His rocket projectiles were shattering the armor-plated drogs. They were down upon the swampy turf, their mighty bulks crimsoned and torn, and yet they hissed and growled while their dead limbs shredded the dank black muck. The Earthman turned his weapon upon the unseeing lizard thing and blew its head from its ugly scaly neck. Even then the legs continued to strip bark from the great tree, nor did the great body collapse for several long minutes. Hodiak cleaned his sword tip and pressed it back upon the spring at its base. Then he went to Nelson and the girl. She had come back when she saw the drogs were down. Nelson was holding the girls in his arms, talking softly to her. He could see in their unguarded minds that they loved one another. So it was that he turned abruptly away and went back to his comfortable steam-heated igloo of stones. Memories of Mian Ith, she of the rioting pinkish-brown tendrils and the full-breasted, slim young body, came to him. Memory of the Earthman's words came to him, and his full lips smiled. Yes, he could rebel and lead others. Tomorrow, he told himself, I will go again to the place of Lalal. There I will find others of the precious scrolls of the ancients, and when I return, I will bring with me Mian Ith. With the knowledge of the Earthman coupled with his own, he might indeed restore to his people the empire they had lost when the fog seas shrank away. Glade Nelson, the Earthman, walked as far as the rim of the lower plateau with Hodiak. And before he swung down into the foggy lake that hid the lowlands and the Sea of Thol, he told the Earthman that he might not return. If I do not come back, he said, there is a possibility that you can return to Earth. Nelson laughed half-heartedly. Not in the low, he said. Naturally, Hodiak flashed back. But your helicopter that you planned to use for exploration on that other planet? Mars, supplied Nelson. Gosden financed the trip and purchased the ship for me. I'd had experience with submarines and aircraft during the Second War, and Gosden knew me then. His sister stowed away aboard. We were several thousand miles out into space when we discovered her. We turned back to Earth then. Our supplies were insufficient. Hodiak smiled. When was it, he wanted to know, that you realized something was so terribly wrong that this was not your home planet? Almost as soon as we had sighted your world of Thrain, said Nelson. Then we saw the 3 suns and the 2 extra planets of your system. He lighted one of his last cigarettes. Just how did we get here? Probably hit a space-time material eddy. Our scientists created an artificial eddy, a sort of gateway, you might say, between parallel worlds. That's how we lost our dense protective atmospheric envelope. The vibrational gateways, in the course of many years' usage, became permanent. Our ancestors no longer could seal them shut by cutting off the power. And so our precious atmosphere drained off into a dozen parallel dimensional worlds. Fortunately, the gateways were on the upper plateaus, and so a thin envelope of denser air remains. But one of those doors leads through to Earth. Maybe several of them. Nelson gripped Hodiak's bulky shoulder. You mean, he gasped, this is really Earth? Only changed? Hodiak agreed. Something like water and sand, he explained, when they're mixed together. They're distinct, but occupy the same space. He turned toward the sea of fog and stepped down into it. He slipped through the sheltering upper layer of agan vines, their huge disc-shaped leaves of blue-veined yellow as a protective screen about him. Here, 300 feet above the mucky soil, the thick rubbery coils were not matted together into a solid wall as they were much lower. He was soon approaching the seacoast city of Gorda, capital and chief city of the priest-ruled nation of Arba. He saw where the floor of writhing pale vegetable stems dropped away abruptly to the mile-wide clearing that the heavy blades of convicted criminals kept cleared away. The shouts of the men, as they hung back on their ropes and hewed at the thick fleshy wall of growth, came faintly to his ears from the fog shroud off to his left. The sound of the booming surf came now from the right. He could not see further away than 15 feet, although his heavy-lidded purple eyes were sharper than the majority of his people, but by the muffled sounds of the city below and the steady throb of the surf's drumbeat, he knew that he was nearing the forgotten twin spikes of a ruined tower. Directly opposite this tower, the place of Lalal heaped its 30 levels, terrace upon terrace, into the eternal thick mistiness of the fog sea. Then he saw the tips of the tower, 2 man-made juts of metal 10 feet apart and covered with great orange and golden knobs of wrinkled, warty fungi. The round holes of sliren turrels gaped beside the vine-buried dome of the ruined tower. The many-legged, blue-scaled, snaky lengths of those hideous monsters had kept open a rounded tube something over 3 feet in diameter. Hodiak had been here before. He drew his sword and lowered himself into the steep, slanting hole. As he descended, he heard from above the increasingly louder voices of men. Some of the workers and their guards were passing. He had entered the Sliren burrow none too soon, and now, if he did not encounter a Sliren in the vine-walled tube, he would shortly be inside the helmet dome of one-time silvery metal that capped the deserted tower. A moment later, he stepped from the tunnel into the moist, thick heat of the broken dome. The broad phosphorescent band of light that was built into the walls of all Arban architecture, waist-high, was dimmed by the slime of ages. But he could see. The dome's interior was not occupied by any of the huge stubby-legged snakes. The Sliren spent most of their lives in the muddy pools and root caverns at ground level. He turned down the ramp that wound into the depths. A forgotten stone-walled passage led under the city walls into the heart of the massive stone pile that was the place of Lalal. And there, in the pleasant upper-level quarters of the One Orst, the high priest of Lalal, lived the daughter of the One Orst, Mian Ith. From his leather jerkin and his weapons some time later, Hodiak wiped the slime and encrusted mud. He was hidden in a deserted apartment upon the 14th level, the same level that housed the children and mates of the One Orst. Thus far had his dark robe, the garment of a fighting priest who now lay trussed up with his own harness on the 2nd level, brought him. Suddenly he crouched behind a massive chest of hammered silver. The apartment's oval stone door slab was swinging inward. Hodiak's sword cleared the leather of his sheath silently. He recognized the voice of the woman who entered the room, Mian Ith, and behind her came a man, a blue-robed priest, one of the seekers after wisdom pledged to the celibate life of a thinker. He wondered why the woman he adored came stealthily to this musty, empty place with this dreamy-eyed seer of the mysteries of Lalal. "My darling," cried Mian Ith, her arms going about the slight body of the thinker, "it is so long since we were together." "I feared," answered the seeker, his soft, high-pitched voice more feminine than Mian Ith's, "that Hodiak would persuade your father that you should be his mate. He, like you, wore the red robes of the priestly rulers." Mian Ith laughed. "The great muscled fool," she sneered. "He thought that I loved him. He told me of his studies in the forbidden books of the ancients. Eeh! But did he reveal his twisted, unbelieving soul to me? It was a little matter to lay a trap for him, to rid myself of him forever." Hodiak felt his lips curl back from his teeth with scorn and hatred. This woman, say rather, this female Sliran. She had betrayed him to the priests of Lalal that she might be free to continue her forbidden trysts with this puny seeker. It was true. He could read the woman's unshielded mind now. He had never attempted to do so heretofore. 2 slashes of his keen-edged bronze sword and he would be avenged. And yet Hodiak shook his head even as the thought came to him. He was well rid of the false-tongued Mian-Ith and the dreamy-eyed seeker he despised. Better had Mian-Ith chosen a stalwart black-robed warrior or yellow-robed toiler for her lover. The man and the woman moved into the other room, their forearms interlocked and their soft head tendrils mingled in that half-embrace. And Hodiak slipped from the outer door into the corridor beyond. A half-ruined ramp within the walls, a ramp sealed off ages past and revealed to the boy Hodiak by a dislodged block of masonry, opened off the ramp a level above. In this way had Hodiak climbed in the bygone years to the upper shrine of Lalal and taken from the thousands of inscribed metal scrolls those he wished to study. He would go to the upper shrine, fill his pouch with other slim metal skin records of the past, and take as well certain small mysterious objects sealed in crystalline spheres. The Earthman might know their purpose. And so Hodiak ascended the ramp and squeezed through the shadowed opening so familiar to him. Later, Hodiak turned for a last look about the upper shrine. He saw crystal-walled cases and unrusting metal devices of the ancients. Here was static knowledge and machinery that might make Arba the mightiest nation upon the shores of the Sea of Thol. He touched lightly the pouch where 9 more of the precious metal scrolls nested. Perhaps after all these centuries the wisdom of the forgotten ages would come to life between his 4 hands' clumsy touch. It was then that the javelins came from the greyness of the shrine's further corners. The one Orst had laid a trap here for Hodiak, that profaner of the sacred place, should he ever return. 1 javelin pierced his side, and another passed completely through the upper muscles of his left middle arm. A 3rd keen-tipped miniature spear struck the handle of his sword, and its copper point blunted harmlessly. From the grey twilight that was all the day men knew beneath the fog sea, there poured a dozen black-robed fighting men. Swords they carried, some of them 2 and 3, and many of them bore the barbed nooses of woven droghide with which they bound prisoners before they were driven, blinded, from Gorda. Hodiak rushed through the panel of stone into the ancient sealed rampway. He paused long enough here to tear the javelin from his side and was relieved to find that it had ploughed shallowly across his ribs. Then he raced down the dimly lighted narrow way. This time he did not attempt to use the opening on the 15th level. The corridors of the place of Lalal would be swarming with black-robed warrior priests and poorly armed yellow-robed toilers. Instead, he raced on down the ramp into the dank stench of the lower levels, for the unused ramp led into the same great underground storage cave that he had entered from the rocky tunnel beneath the city walls. Bricked up and partially sealed was its end, and for this reason he had not ascended that way. Signs of his passing might have shown in a litter of chipped cement and displaced yellowish slime had he done so, but now he could shove the wall outward and race toward freedom. What matter now if they found a gaping hole in an apparently solid supporting pillar of masonry? He put his eye to the broken wall as he reached the great basement cave in this part of the underground citadel beneath the place. Apparently no guards had been posted here as yet. He lunged against the wall and it clattered down. Then he darted across the slippery muck and sprouting toadstool growth to the hidden entrance to the tunnel leading outside. Even then, he heard the rasp of the scaly black plates of hunting drogs, the domesticated long-limbed smaller lizards that the warriors of Arba use in hunting upon the Agan's jungle's upper terrace for the bat-winged wild lizards and white-fleshed tender legless serpents so prized on Arban tables. The black-robed ones had turned their swift drogs upon his trail. His only safety lay in flight. Almost had he reached the abandoned tower when the hunting drogs were upon him. Even as they reached his heels, Hodiak cast a despairing glance upward and saw one of the ancient ventilating shafts that supplied air to this buried way. He sprang upward, and his fingers closed upon a tough Agan root. A moment later, all 4 of his hands were gripping other roots, and he was climbing carefully up through a rounded shaft. Below him, the hunting drogs leaped high into the air and fell back again, whistling, growling, and screaming in their saurian, stupid way. 20 feet he had climbed before a solid mat of agan blocked further upward progress. Hodiak clung to the huge hairy white roots and peered about him. Meanwhile, the place's warriors came swiftly up with their 6-limbed lizard beasts. A cry of triumph came up to Hodiak. "Come down, Hodiak," one of them shouted, "and we will not permit the drogs to destroy you." Hodiak laughed shortly. "It is you who will destroy me," he said, "and not the drogs. I prefer the drogs." "Surrender, Hodiak," cried the man menacingly. "At once, and the one horse may but take from you your eyes. Delay, and his tame drogs will eat your limbs one by one as you yet live." "I prefer a javelin," mocked Hodiak. "The death is clean and merciful." "Then take it," shouted the man, drawing back his throwing stick. But even as a hail of javelins hummed upward, Hodiak was in motion. He had swung on his shaggy ladder of roots into a ragged crevice in the side of the shaft, and so the javelins buried themselves only in the rubbery coils of agan. A howl of rage rolled up through the old ventilating shaft. Hodiak crawled further into the narrow crevice. At every instant he expected to find that the probing roots or stems of the fleshy agan had closed this last hope of escape, but as time passed and the way widened, he began to hope. Other tunnels branched off from time to time, and he crawled through tepid pools of foul water in which he sensed the wriggling of hideous alien things with scaly finned limbs and tails. The blackness was total. He groped onward. And then he fell forward into a blackness that was not total, and found himself squatting in the shallow muck of a sullen underground river. Or perhaps that lightless roof overhead was but the matted stems and roots of the sunless vines of the fog seas. He saw a faint luminous glow that came from the river. Thousands of tiny, light-producing aquatic plant animals swarmed in the depths. He saw a raft of tide-buoyant agan stems, huge 2-foot sections 10 and 11 feet long, and poling it along with a tough spear of hide-bound bone was a woman in a scant, ragged tunic. At the same instant she saw him. "In Lalal's name," she demanded, "why do you sit in the water so? Are not there few enough warriors in the 2 caves of the outcasts without offering yourself thus freely to the water slirrans?" Hodiak realized that this was one of the blinded outcasts turned out to die in the jungles because they dared question the rule of the one Orst and his priestly underlings. "I am Hodiak," he said, "who is hunted by the black-robed ones, the Orsts." "We have heard of you, Hodiak," the blind girl said, "and we welcome you to the poor sanctuary of our caves." She poled the raft nearer. "I am San Vod, daughter of Dravod." "Dravod is your father?" cried Hodiak. "I have heard of him. He built a machine powered by the sap of pressed agan for his boat." "Aye," agreed the girl, "and his reward was blindness. Of the 300 outcasts in our rocky caves, 100 are sightless." "You can see!" Hodiak burst out. He was looking into the beautiful, slim face of the girl. She was more beautiful than Mian Ith had ever been. From that moment, Hodiak forgot the faithless one Orst's daughter. "Of course," agreed the girl, laughing. "I was born after my father was taken into the hidden village of the outcasts." They sat close together then in the raft, and Hodiak opened his mind to the mind of the girl. She in turn opened her mind to him. It was not long that they sat thus, but when San Vod took up the pole of bone again, they had found that they loved one another. Never before had Hodiak allowed another to probe into the remoter recesses of his brain. But he knew that she could be trusted. Her childlike acceptance of him, even before he opened his thoughts to her, convinced him of that. "I will go with you to the camp of the Earthman," she told Hodiak softly, as they neared the upreared hillock of soft grey rock from which their 2 cave homes had been laboriously scraped. "It is good," agreed Hodiak. "And later, when we have found a secure place, I will come back for your people. The outcasts will be the first to share with us the wisdom of the ancients." San Vod flashed him a quick mental caress as the raft grounded in the shelter of an overhanging ledge. He stepped to take her in his arms and halted as a giant of a man groped toward them. Where his eyes had been, there were now but empty sockets. "My father," said the girl. "Dra Vod." "And my father as well," said Hodiak, leaping to the blind man's side, and his two middle arms locked with the elbows of Dra Vod's short middle arms. Dra Vod's own powerful webbed fingers gripped Hodiak's elbows in return as their minds interlocked in greeting for a brief moment. So it was that 2 days later, Hodiak and his mate San climbed the chill slopes above the lowlands and came to the highlands. With them came 2 of the outcasts, young hunters who wished to see the world above the fog sea. Hodiak wore the spacesuit that he had cached far below in a rocky cliff's creviced wall, and San and the 2 outcasts wore as many and more garments than Hodiak had worn long days before. As they came through the last shreds of the watery vapour that flooded the bowl of the Sea of Thol, one of the young outcast warriors was in the lead. Suddenly he uttered a short, choked cry and fell, toppling back into the mist, and the rocks around them rattled with copper-tipped javelins. "Quick!" shouted Hodiak. "It is the black-robed ones, the priests! They have been lying in wait for us!" Back into the welcome protection of the fog sea the outcasts plunged, but now there were only 3 of them. For one thing was Hodiak grateful: the thinning network of Agan afforded no safe footing for the hunting drogs. "We die?" questioned San quietly, and Hodiak laughed back at her. They were resting for a moment, listening. "Not so long as my sword arms last," he said, "and of arms I have 4. "But they will follow us along the rim," objected San. "When we climb upward again they will see us." "They are cold and hungry," Hodiak told her, "and there are none too many of them. If we can reach the plateau safely, we can fight them off until we reach the rocket ship of the Earthman." "We will be safe with the rocket rifle of Nelson to protect us," agreed San. Hodiak started along the thick stalks of Agan again, his arms gripping the interlacing of rubbery greenish stems on his right, and behind him came San and the young outcast. By nightfall they had moved a matter of 2 miles further along the left wall of the barrier cliffs. The lone moon of Thrain had not as yet lifted above the horizon, and so they climbed silently upward into an almost complete darkness. Out of the fog sea they made their way, and safely into the dense jungle growth spreading at this point. San was chilled to the bone, and the young warrior's thick lips were blue with cold. The temperature of the lower plateau had dropped to almost 100 degrees with the coming of dusk, 90 degrees below that of the lowlands. And so Hodiak followed a small stream, warmer than the usual upland streams, up to a rocky bluff where steaming water rolled white vapour into the growing moonlight of the jungle clearing. By some good fortune, the hot spring gushed up in the heart of a small cavern, and the 2 outcasts were not forced to lie in the almost boiling water. With morning, they marched eastward to the jungle meadow where the spaceship's shattered bulk lay. The spaceship was empty. Hodiak saw that the helicopter was gone from the cargo hold, and with it many supplies. Nelson and the girl had thought he was not returning, and gone in search of the ancient gateway that might pierce through to Earth. Hodiak turned his eyes toward the mud-daubed hut of stones he had abandoned. His eyes widened at the sight of steam rising from its dome. Could they be? No, it was impossible. Shattered though it was, the spaceship afforded better protection for Nelson and Marta than the igloo. Then who? Immediately Hodiak knew the answer. The black-robed Orsts had taken over the igloo, and they were not yet aware of the presence of the outcasts. He returned to the hidden outcasts, his mate and the young warrior, but with him he carried a rocket rifle that Nelson had thoughtfully left behind. "Come," he told the warrior, "we will drive the black-robed ones from our hut. With the Earthman's gun they will be helpless before us." They marched side by side, 2 warriors from the fog sea, toward the rocky dome from which the plumes of white steam jetted. At last the priests saw them and came pouring from their warm shelter. "Go back to the place of Lalal," ordered Hodiak. The black-robed, thick-padded bodies of the 7 priestly fighting men shook with laughter. These 2 outcasts ordered them to retreat. They plunged ahead. The rocket gun whirred and an explosion ripped 2 of the priest warriors into tatters. Hodiak reloaded and fired, and a 3rd warrior dropped. And then the tiny battery that fired the rocket shell went dead. The 3rd rocket shell did not blast into the attacking men. Hodiak flung down the useless weapon and drew his sword. Javelins could not pierce his spacesuit, only a sword could crush through to his body. His other hand was busy with his throwing stick and javelins, and he cursed the 2 limbs of the Earthman that prevented his middle pair of arms from being used. 4 of the enemy faced the 2 of them at the last, and their weapons clashed together. Hodiak fought with the strength of despair and downed one of the black-robed ones, but then he was battling 3 swordsmen. The young outcast had fallen. Suddenly, a shadow fell upon the fighting men from above. An explosion sounded, and a priestly warrior fell, and then another. The sole survivor raced madly away toward the Fog Sea's welcome shelter, and Hodiak was glad to let him escape. He would carry the word of the terrible weapons of Earth to the watchers along the rim. The spaceship's helicopter settled slowly to the ground. Hodiak hurried toward the little ship's cabin, and at the same time he saw San come stumbling from the jungle toward them. "Nick of time," grinned Nelson, and behind him Hodiak could see Marta Gosden's startled, bloodless face. "Right you are," Hodiak assured the Earthman. "And how did the search for a gateway to Earth go?" "We're not worrying about that for the present," said Nelson. "You need us, Hodiak, and I think we need you too. We're staying here on Thrain for a long time." "I am glad," Hodiak flashed. "In centuries to come, all Thrain will bless you." "That's so much jet dust," scoffed Nelson. "But we did find a canyon several miles deep, Hodiak, a sort of fog lake where you might be able to live normally, and above it, on the second plateau, we found an ideal spot for our own home." He squeezed Marta's shoulder as she slipped past him. Then he was beside her as she greeted San. Hodiak smiled as he felt the friendly spirit that was instantly kindled between these women of 2 strange races. "She is lovely," cried Marta to Hodiak and Nelson, "and so miserable. Run to the ship, Glade, and bring another spacesuit." Yes, thought Hodiak. With the knowledge of 2 races, his ivory-skinned race might once again spread up over the fertile, chill plateaus of Thrain. Already he loved the mighty vistas of clear air here above the Fog Sea. Never again would he be satisfied with the circumscribed greyness of a fog-bound world. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss my new videos every Friday. And if you want more, there are hundreds of stories on this channel. I recommend going to the playlist section where you can find playlists of individual stories and compilations like this one. And to support me further, you could head over to Substack and sign up to the paid tier for exclusive stories, including serialized novels all in ad-free audio, video and podcast form. A link to that is in the description. See you in the next one.